Are you looking for a sweet, hearty, and delicious breakfast that isn't going to take all your bites and points for the day? Or maybe you're just looking for something to throw a little low bite, low point ice cream on top of. Well, if that's you, I've got the perfect solution for you here. These are my light, basic waffles. And you know me, I'll give you plenty of options to dress these up. Because basic is just a starting point. So if you'd like to see how these are done, stick around because it's coming up next. Hello and welcome to my kitchen. My name's Roy. I'm a home cook, an amateur baker, and I'm here on this channel sharing recipes that have helped me to lose over 125 pounds, whether those recipes are mine or someone else's. Now today is one of mine, but again, I didn't create waffles. You've all had waffles before. This is just my take on waffles to bring down the bites and points where I can. Now, as you saw in the title description or the thumbnail, this is basic waffles. I will be giving you other options of ways of doctoring them up. It's not, as my stepson thought, basic in the bad way. Like, oh, she's so basic. Not that kind of basic. This is just a blank canvas for you to do as you like. You can have them just as they are, or you can doctor them up, but I will talk about that as we move along. Now, I am using a new microphone today, so I'm hoping that it picks up the audio well. The one that I usually wear on my apron, the wire is a little wonky and has been giving me staticky issues, so I do have to replace that, but I'm hoping that the little boom mic that I have on the camera will be doing a good job. If not, you may not be seeing this, but you probably are. Anyway, let us go over the basic waffles ingredients. I have here, of course, my handy dandy cooking spray. And here I have 1 cup of almond milk that is at room temperature. Everything here is at room temperature to help everything combine more easily. As I've said before, if you put cold things in together, it takes a little more effort to bring them all together. I have here 1.5 cups of flour. Now, this is one of the places where you can play around with this recipe. You could replace 1/2 cup of that for protein powder if you need to up your protein intake at all, or if you just want to add a little extra flavor, coffee latte, peanut butter, chocolate, vanilla, what have you. If you need to bump up your protein, that is the place to do it. Just swap out 1/2 cup of the flour for 1/2 cup of the protein powder. And honestly, I usually do substitute protein powder to help bring down the bites and points, but it didn't alter them at all. So I went with straight flour so that we didn't have to fuss with the protein powder unless you'd like to. Now, if you wanted to make these chocolate waffles, what you would do is replace 1/3 cup of the flour with 1/3 cup of cocoa powder. It's a little wonky since I'm doing 1.5 cups. It's not an even measure. So what I would do is measure out the flour as indicated, then scoop out 1/3 cup, put that back in the container, and then put in your cocoa powder. Because that way you don't have to worry about trying to calculate, okay, what's 1/3 of 1/2 and who needs that? Just measure it out, scoop out 1/3 cup and put in your cocoa powder. You'd also want to add about 3 tablespoons of sugar replacement because this won't be sweet enough to counteract the bitterness of the cocoa. And you could also do some add-ins, and I will go over more options later, but if you were doing chocolate, you could add in 1/3 cup of sugar-free chocolate chips, 1/3 cup of diced strawberries or diced cherries, chocolate cherry, chocolate strawberry. Those are options as well. I have here 1 cup of non-fat Greek yogurt. That is, of course, at room temperature. I have here 2 eggs, 3 tablespoons of unsweetened applesauce, and that is one of the places where I reduced the bites and points is I substituted applesauce for the typical butter or oil that is in a waffle batter. 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract. If you wanted to, you could change out the extract. Say you wanted to do a chocolate with some coconut flavoring, you could do a coconut extract. So it doesn't have to be vanilla, but for the basic, that's what we're going with. And here I have 1.5 teaspoons of baking powder and 1 teaspoon of baking soda. Now, the reason you need both, and I have discussed this in previous videos, but in case you're new, the reason you want both is because we're using acidic ingredients, the Greek yogurt. And acids can keep leaveners from doing their job of making things rise. So to counteract that, we're going to add in the baking soda because that's going to act as a distraction for the acid. It's going to be over here saying, hey, look at me. And meanwhile, the baking powder is going to be able to do its job and giving us some fluffy waffles. And then I have here 1/2 teaspoon of cinnamon, 1/4 teaspoon of salt. Now, if you wanted, you could make savory waffles, and I'll go into a little more detail in a bit. But one thing you would want to do is double up on the salt just to enhance the savoriness. All right, so those are the ingredients. Let me grab my waffle iron and a few other things, and we'll get started. Okay, so first thing we're going to do, we're going to combine the dry ingredients, the flour, baking powder, baking soda, cinnamon, and salt. We're going to whisk this all together here just to make a homogeneous mixture so that everything is integrated completely. And then we're going to make a little well in the center for when we need to pour in our liquid. So let me move this out of the way. And I'm going to bring in my larger measuring cup. And we are going to combine all of the wet ingredients. Almond milk, the Greek yogurt, the eggs, applesauce, and vanilla. And just whisk that all to combine. You may need to pounce on those eggs a little bit to break up the yolks. And now we are going to bring in the dry ingredients again and a spatula. You don't want to whisk this because you don't want to form too much gluten. You want it to be nice and fluffy and tender. And also, the whisk tends to clump up with all of your ingredients, and then you're trying to tap off all of the coagulated flour that's in there. So it's just easier with a spatula. So I'm just going to pour all of that inside that little well we made. And now what we're going to do is just fold this all together, being gentle with it as we can. You don't have to go crazy and worry too much about it. You just don't want to develop a lot of gluten. It will take a moment. You'll have to fold the liquid and flour around so that it starts to hydrate the flour. And then once it's mostly incorporated so that you won't have a little flour shower all over the place, you can be a little more aggressive with it. If you see any big pockets of flour and you want to scrape down the edges, get all of that flour incorporated. And now you can see that it's still got some lumps in it. That is fine. You don't have to worry about the lumps. What we're going to do is let these sit here for about 10 minutes and let that flour hydrate a little bit more without stirring. That'll make sure everything gets incorporated without over-mixing the batter. So I'm going to set this aside and bring in the waffle iron and get this plugged in. And we want it to have time to heat up. So I'm going to turn this on. Now I'm using a Belgian waffle iron. And that means, as you can see here, that the pockets that's going to create are deeper. That is the difference between Belgian waffles and typical waffles. It's just that the little dimples are a lot deeper. Now mine is a model where I can make 2 at once just by rotating it. And then I will turn it sideways to let it lock. One of the problems that isn't really a problem, but it might freak you out a little bit at first, is that you may get some of the batter seeping out around the edges. But that's fine. It's not a big deal. It's just a little more cleanup, but it makes sure that you get a complete waffle. If you wanted to, you could do a smaller amount so that that didn't happen, and then you would just have like more ragged edges than what I'm going to get, hopefully. So here is your bit of trivia for the day. Pancakes came before waffles. Are they the same? No. They do use the same ingredients, but the ratios are off. Waffles tend to use more fat in them to help get that crispy outer edge. Now I have, because I had waffle batter, I have actually made pancakes with them, and it's very weird because they do get almost like a crust on the outside, which is not typical of a pancake. So that's where the differences are, is the ratio of the ingredients. Now, waffles have been around since the Middle Ages, pancakes well before that. And the reason was they didn't have anything to make a waffle. And the idea for waffles actually came from communion wafer irons, where they used to imprint religious imagery onto the communion wafer. So people took that idea, they did different shapes, they ended up making waffles square, which is a lot of times typical, although nowadays you see a lot more round ones, which were more typical back then. Now the word waffle actually comes from an old word that meant honeycomb or cake, which is kind of inconvenient since it is kind of like a honeycombed cake. But anyways, that's the history lesson for the day. My waffle iron is heated up, but the batter still needs a few minutes. So while I'm waiting for the batter to get where it's going, let me tell you of a few of the options that you can make with the waffles. One of the first ones I made recently was a lemon blueberry waffle. What you would do for that, and this will all be in the recipe so you don't have to worry about remembering what I'm saying. But what you would need for that would be the zest of one lemon as well as the juice. If you wanted to do orange or even lime, what you would do is about a tablespoon of the zest and about 2 tablespoons of the juice. Then I added 1/2 cup of blueberries. Now you could change that out for strawberries. Strawberry and lemon go really well together. The thing you should be aware of is as they are cooking, the moisture and the air inside the blueberries will make a squealing noise. So don't be surprised when suddenly you hear this strange squealing noise coming from your waffles if you do add blueberries or some sort of fruit. You could also make apple cinnamon waffles. What I would do is grate in a medium-sized apple and bump up the cinnamon to 2 teaspoons instead of 1. I've already said you could make these into protein waffles. I've also told you how to do the chocolate waffles. And again, this will all be in the recipe. But the savory options, besides just bumping up the salt, you could add in some spinach, some chopped ham, a bit of fat-free cheddar cheese, even mozzarella if that's your preference, and just make that into a savory waffle. So you don't have to stick with this type of waffle for breakfast. I did make hash brown waffles at some point, but that's a totally different type of thing. But that was great with chicken strips on it. And if you haven't seen that video, I'll link it here and in the description box. But you could make a savory waffle and do chicken and waffles with that. You don't have to do the hash brown waffle like I had done. But you have options. You can play around with this and do what you like. Get the flavors you like. But let me give this batter another minute and we will move on. All right, so for the Belgian waffles, and I'm doing this as making 4 Belgian waffles. I sometimes make a waffle and Paul and I just split it and have 2 little segments each. So you can play around with it. If you have a one of those mini dash waffle makers, you can use that. You will get more waffles and you can adjust the bites and points based on how many of those you consume. Or if you use a regular waffle iron, you may get another extra waffle out of it, depending on the size of the grooves. But what I'm going to do first is open this up and spray it with cooking spray. And because I'm using the Belgian waffle, I'm going to add about 3/4 of a cup of the batter. And I'm using my number 14 scoop, which is about 1/4 cup. So I'm just going to put that into the center of the waffle iron. and kind of smooth that out a little bit. So that side, close it, and then I'm going to flip it over and do the other one. Because I can make 2 at a time, it's much easier than having to wait. But if you are making this for a group, or even if you're just making them to freeze and have on hand, I have my baking sheet here with a cooling rack on it, so that once they are done, I can put that on top. I'm going to turn this to the middle so that it locks both in place. So that way when the waffle batter starts to expand in there, it doesn't start to open up the lid. A lot of waffle makers, if you have a standard one, will have a little lock on it so that doesn't happen. Some of them don't, so you may have to hold on to it. This will tell me when they're done. It's usually, I think, about 5 or 6 minutes. I personally like my waffles with a little more of a crust than what the timing of this gives me. So I will often leave it in for a minute or 2 extra, but I'll show you once it's done, once it beeps at me, and I'll decide then if I'm going to go a little further. So give me a few minutes and I'll be back. Okay, so there's the first one ready. It's been about 4 or 5 minutes, and you can see it's nicely brown, and I think that is exactly where I want it. I do have my tongs here to help me get this out so that I don't burn myself, but that looks beautiful. And there goes the second one. So flip that around and take that out. Now normally this is the edge I was talking about where it might look a little more ragged, and usually it fills up more, so I was probably being a little careful with not overdoing it. So now I'm going to spray it again and finish up my waffles, and I'll be back. Okay, so the second batch is done, and you can see it went more to the edges, and that's the way I typically get them. But as I said, I did underestimate a little bit just so that I wouldn't have too much spillage. And I will show you exactly what I mean, because if I turn this off, if I turn this sideways, you can see where I had this angled like this. Some of the excess batter did drip out, but I don't mind that because it does give me a more perfect waffle shape. So I don't mind you losing a little bit of the batter. Now, if you were using just a regular waffle iron, you'd probably use about a half a cup of batter. But if you've made waffles for a while, if you actually have a waffle maker, you already may know how much it takes. If you're using a Belgian waffle maker, I would go with about 3/4 of a cup. But there you have them, my basic waffles. And I gave you options to play around with the batter and make them your own. That will be, as I said, in the recipe. Now, typical 7-inch Belgian waffles, these are 7-inch here. They are typically 7 Better Balanced Bites or Old Blue Points, or Present Points, I guess. I'm on the Healthy Better Balance plan, which is equivalent to the old WW Blue plan, which I guess is their simplified plan now. I'm not sure if I even could say simplified correctly, because my jaw and throat are acting up on me, but that's beside the point. For one of my waffles, and by one I mean this entire thing, you can have that entire waffle for just 4 Better Balanced Bites or Old Blue Points. If you split it in half, you would get 2 bites or points per serving. But I'm making this to serve 4 because I like to indulge, especially on the weekends, and so I could easily eat an entire thing. Now, what I'm going to do, because it is 2:30 in the afternoon, is I'm going to wrap these up and freeze them so that I have them on hand for whenever we want waffles. I'll just throw them in the toaster oven and heat them through. What I will also do at times is segment them. You see how they're segmented into 4. I will break off one segment, 1/4 of that, put a little Nick's ice cream on top, and have a little waffle sundae. So you can do whatever you want. You can serve it with sugar-free syrup. You can serve it with fruit, with whipped cream. however you like to serve it. Now, if you're following calories, the calories for one of these waffles would be 255. And if you were following macros, the fat would be 3.6 grams, the carbs would be 40.3 grams, the fiber would be 1.5 grams, and the protein would be 14 grams. And that's as I made it. If you added protein powder, you'd obviously bump up the protein and reduce the carbs a bit. But I hope that you enjoyed this recipe, and if you did, I'd appreciate doing the usual: like, subscribe, comment, share, and hit the notification bell for the next time I upload any sort of video. We do have a casserole collab coming up on the 26th, which is also the day that I will be doing another live stream at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. But the collab was started by Sandy over at Life with Sandy. So that will be coming out on the morning of the 26th, and in the afternoon I will be doing my live stream. But if you hit the notification bell, you'll know when I'm doing things, when new things are released. So hit that bell. Now, the recipe for these beauties will be down in the description box. I will link directly to this recipe as well as to the blog itself. Also down there is my Amazon storefront, my Built Bar rewards, Fetch rewards, Skinny Syrups code, and my social media if you'd like to follow me over there, my Instagram, and 2 Facebook groups that I am a part of. So go check out that description box for all sorts of information. So I'm going to wait for these to cool down, then I'm going to wrap them individually, throw them into a freezer bag, and store them in the freezer until we decide we need a good breakfast or a nice little treat. So I hope you'll be giving these a try soon, and until next time, bye.